Welcome to our KPC Daily Devotional. Let's begin by reading from 2 Corinthians chapter 5, beginning at verse 16. From now on, therefore, we regard no one from a human point of view. Even though we once knew Christ from a human point of view, we know him no longer in that way. So if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Everything old has passed away. Look, everything has become new. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ, and has given us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting the message of reconciliation to us. So we are ambassadors for Christ, since God is making his appeal through us. And we entreat you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. Today I'm reading from my first collection of devotionals, According to Barclay, Reflections on Life in the Human Pack. And today's is entitled, The Ride Around the Block. Thinking that my schnauzer Barclay would be bored walking the same old route every day, I decided to take him for an outing. We climbed into the car and drove out into the country. He was curious at first, then gradually lost interest and settled in to nap in the front seat. Not what I had expected. I thought he would become more and more excited as we moved into new territory with new scenery and new smells. When I stopped and took him for a walk, well, he found that interesting enough, and maybe that part was a bit of an outing for him. And then we headed home. Barclay was napping again until we got a few blocks from the house. Suddenly he sat up, sniffed the air, and hopped up to the window, watching everything very intently. It was the most excitement he'd shown all day. He's excited, I thought, because he knows we're almost home. Ah, the naive human. Eventually, I discovered it didn't matter if we were coming or going. Barclay was most excited and most attentive when we were riding in familiar territory. This has proven true not just of Barclay or only schnauzers, but all of our dogs, regardless of breed. If you want to give a dog a real thrill, roll down the windows a little and drive them very slowly along the same route where they usually take their walks. Ride them around the block. It's the thrill of the familiar. One of my seminary professors, Dr. James Loader, always said, there's nothing more boring than endless novelty. We students would all nod sagely, but in reality, we didn't have a clue what he meant. Young and stupid, we still thought new stuff, new scenery, new clothes, new love was always the most exciting, and that old familiar stuff was boring. After all, don't they say familiarity breeds contempt? Well, how could it be otherwise? In fact, what we actually find new and exciting is something familiar with just a little something changed. Creative genius is simply the art of combining familiar elements in fresh and unfamiliar ways. My mother once worked for Opinion Research, evaluating what kinds of cars people might buy. This was back in 1943, and she told us how in 1943 the cars of the 60s, 70s, and 80s were already on the drawing table. But her survey showed nobody wanted any of those, not in 1943. They wanted something like the 1942 car with a slightly more aerodynamic grille. The latest fashion, yes, is something from 2 decades ago, just in a different color. Familiarity takes the uncertainty out of novelty. Too much novelty is stressful. I lived in Europe for many years, and if you want to see the world, skip the big tours. 14 countries in 12 days is endless novelty. My folks tried that one time and found after a couple of days it all ran together into a blur, leaving them physically and emotionally exhausted. And all they remembered of their trip was how exhausting it was. Well, what would Barclay enjoy? Well, do that. To see Europe, pick one region of one country, stay in one place, and just take day trips into the countryside. Give it time to become familiar, and you'll be able to see and appreciate the little details here and there that make it memorable. See, what Barclay finds so exciting about riding around the block is that he knows this territory, the usual landmarks, the usual smells, but he is seeing and smelling it from a new perspective, a slightly different angle, and it all appears a little bit new again. But because it's familiar, he's not intimidated or overwhelmed. He can appreciate the new because it is nestled in the familiar. People get suckered into the lure of endless novelty all the time. A man in midlife crisis abandons his wife and family to hunt for, a new place, a new job, a new girlfriend, whatever. Churches fight and split over the familiar traditional worship style versus a stripped-down new contemporary one. We get bored with the familiar and haven't yet learned how boring endless novelty can be. You'll discover that most so-called contemporary churches pretty soon include a lot of old gospel hymns in their repertoire. If I'm bored with my house, or my job, or my marriage, or my religion, or whatever, I don't have to jettison everything and invent something radically new in order to re-infuse some excitement into my life. Extreme novelty, it only brings uncertainty, tension, frustration, intimidation, exhaustion. It's enough if I just take a ride around the block. That is, only change a little something or find a fresh perspective on things. Look at it from a new angle. It is bring just a little something new into the familiar. And suddenly everything looks new and different. And sometimes all that really needs to be a little different is me. I wish you a blessed day ahead. Goodbye.